guest on the chaise lounge this evening is Dr. David Clarke. Now, earlier in the interview today, I had the chance to talk to Nick Pope. Many of you out there will know there's been somewhat of a battle going on online of late amongst conspiracy theorists who have perhaps blown things out of proportion, I think, a little. Dr. David Clarke put in a submission a few years ago now, wasn't it, initially? Asking, tell us about exactly what happened.
Well, you want right from the beginning? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as you know, I've been involved in making lots and lots of freedom of information requests for documents that the MOD have produced on UFOs. And what I believe in, and I think what most people in property and exopolitics and the disclosure movement believe in, is total disclosure. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing that needs to be withheld are people's personal details, i.e. names and addresses, etc. So what I wanted to see, and don't forget I made this application before the MOD made the decision to release all these files that we're currently seeing. I was interested in seeing what actually happened when Nick Pope decided that he wanted to sort of tell the world that he'd seen this evidence and he'd become a UFO believer, that kind of thing. Because I knew, because Nick had said so in his own writings and interviews at the time, that there'd been some, a really big sort of problem with his superiors, that they didn't want him to publish this book. That it was something that they saw as, I don't know, it was undermining the message that they were putting out. I mean, we all know what the MOD's stance is on UFOs, no defence significance. Here you got a civil servant working in that department who publicly come out and said, he didn't buy it. He was actually contradicting his own department stance. Now, I knew that obviously there'd been internal discussion about that, so that's what I asked for. And I think that's a quite reasonable request under freedom of information. There's a public interest in that. And let me give you an analogy. If, for example, during the mad cow disease outbreak, you got the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and Food that was saying, whatever it was they were saying, I can't remember now. But if you got a civil servant within that department who would publicly come out and said, don't listen to what MAF are saying, it's all a load of nonsense, that would be of intense public interest. And people would want to know why it was that civil servant had said what he or she had said. So that basically is why I asked to see the papers.
Now, Nick claims that obviously a lot of this is his personal information, personal beliefs, personal stuff that he doesn't want out. Where do you think we draw the line between what becomes MOD material onto FOI and what is actually Nick's private life?
Well, can I, if you don't mind, if I can quote something that Nick actually said himself. He said, quote, "I believe that governments and the military and indeed private researchers, politicians, whoever, should place everything in the public domain on this issue. Governments can't, I think, have it both ways." Does he believe that or doesn't he? Because if he's saying that everything should be put in the public domain on this issue, everything means everything, doesn't it? So when he's saying that it's his private business, it's not his private business, because I'm not asking for anything to do with his private life. This is where the spin comes in. If you actually read what I actually asked for, I'm asking for the discussions that went on between public officials about what they should say in reaction to what Nick was saying to the press. That isn't his private business. That is public business. Civil servants are paid for by the public. We pay for them out of our taxes. And I have the view that we should see everything that they produce. That's total disclosure, is it not?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Nick says that he's no longer working for the Ministry of Defence. A lot of people don't believe that. Certainly on the conspiracy forums, there's an awful lot of people who believe he is still employed by the Ministry of Defence. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think he's working for the Ministry of Defence. I take his word for it. But, what I'd like to say is I do understand his position on this. And if it was me, I don't think I'd want this sort of stuff coming out. What we know is in those papers are his bosses taking him to task and saying, what the hell are you doing this for? You're going to cause us a load of trouble. You're going to cause us a lot of extra workload, etc., etc. They obviously were not very happy about what he was doing. But I actually think he took a very brave step coming out, given that background, and saying what he did in public. And I don't see why he should be embarrassed at those papers coming out, because, maybe his bosses were criticising him, but so what? By seeing that discussion, by seeing what his bosses said about this situation, it might actually give us some clues as to what was really going on in the MOD regarding UFOs.
Okay, moving on from that, you've spent an awful lot of time in archives over the years. You're probably one of the most thorough researchers I think I've come across in ufology. Spent a lot of time actually going through the nitty-gritty. What's your own view on ufology? Do you believe that there is such things as aliens coming from outer space? Do you think it's military craft, black ops? What's your view on what you've found to date?
Ooh. How long have you got for this interview? Where would I start? I think like I think I was saying earlier on in the Q&A session today that there isn't a UFO phenomenon. There isn't one thing that causes UFOs. There are lots of phenomena, and that includes the vast majority of cases, which I think everybody would agree that something like 90-odd%, when they're investigated properly, can be explained as, meteors, balloons, stars, planets, all that kind of thing. So that's one thing, misperceptions. There may be a tiny, tiny residue of cases that might be caused by black ops and, military aircraft, that kind of thing. I think that the residue that's left, the vast majority of that residue that can't be explained after you've removed all those things, and hoaxes, you've got to get that in there as well. And even though there might only be a small number of hoaxes, they're often the most important cases, where you've got photographs and that sort of thing. So they do have a huge influence on things. So hoaxes, misperceptions of natural phenomena, black projects. I think black projects, tiny, tiny percentage of the remaining total. And I think the remaining, what's left, the residue, again, is a whole concatenation of lots of different things that are perhaps unrelated, such as natural phenomena that we don't understand. Ball lightning, atmospheric plasmas, the sort of things that the Ministry of Defence's Condign report were talking about. And I fully agree with the conclusions of that, even though the methodology was completely, not done in the way it should have been done. But even so, I still think the conclusions to that were correct. But even then, I would not rule out the possibility that perhaps, I wouldn't say in recent years, but maybe at some point in Earth's history, we have been visited by extraterrestrials. How can you rule that out if you're truly open-minded?
So I agree. No, I agree on that. I mean, we'd be very, very arrogant if we thought we were the only civilized race in the universe. If indeed we're civilized, I sometimes wonder about that.